Hey, hello, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of getting students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I work at IE Business School Publishing, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. So engagers, today we have Willem. Willem, are you prepared to engage?
Oh yeah, I'm really ready to engage.
Let's do this. So Willem Jan-Renger, I did my best in that pronunciation. He is the head of the Innovation Studio at HKU, part of the Center for Research and Innovation at the same name of that university, HKU. It's a crossover creative space for research, design, and education. So very, very interesting for us engagers here. Functions as an innovation lab for design and applied research on the design of human behavior, motivation, and perception. It's rooted in design psychology, using design principles from the field, game, play, design to solve real-world problems in an innovative way. They foster innovation in healthcare, education, cultural heritage, and they build up knowledge and expertise on innovation processes in these contexts and share this knowledge both within and outside HKU. And he is also the founder of something called ludodidactiek. I'm sure I didn't pronounce that right. He'll talk a bit more about that in the interview and correct my terrible pronunciation for sure, which is a unique design methodology focused on a specific application of game and play principles for learning and teaching. So very, very exciting is what we're going to be talking about today. So Willem, let's dive right into the first thing that we like to know about our guests. And that's, what does a usual day with you look like, or a usual week if your days are completely different in that sense?
Well, I think you nail it if you say let's look at a week instead of a day, because one of the perks of my job is that no day is the same. So let's look at it from a week basis. There are a couple of regular patterns emerging. So I am still engaged in education, which means I'm supervising a number of master students, and we do this in a sort of coaching role. So I have flexible dates set with them to talk them through their master's program. And in a way, this master's program, which is called Crossover Creativity, aims to train game changers, and we try to teach them to apply, let's say, creativity and design principles and design patterns in areas that are not familiarly used to dealing with design. And this can be healthcare, this can be smart cities, this can be social innovation. It's a wide range of topics because the students bring their own subjects, their own fascinations to the course. So as a team of teachers and trainers, we have to accommodate for a wide range of subjects. So that's a regular part of my week. I'm also involved in some educational innovation in our own institution. So currently I'm involved in a new minor program, and we're also developing a new bachelor's program. So I might have a slot or two in the week to deal with that. I'm currently engaged in a European project, which falls under the Horizon 2020 program. And this is on citizen engagement, which seems way off of the other aspects of your introduction. But in that project, we try to bring the notions of design of behavior and design of motivation to the field of, let's say, urban renewal and energy transition. And we try to create and develop new methodologies to engage citizens in energy transition, which is a very exciting project, a very complex project as well. 43 partners involved, and we have to bring our methodology to Utrecht as a city, but also Nice and Göteborg, and a ring of second cities around that. Amongst them are Vasa and a city in Romania and a city in Greece. So that's very exciting as well. So I would spend some time on that project throughout any week. And then I'm running as a head of Innovation Studio, running the studio as well. So one day I would try and be fully present in the studio and deal with my excellent team members. I got game designers, a programmer, a senior artist, and then there will be a number of interns from inside HKU that are sitting there and work as well. They would be focusing on applied game design in all shapes and forms. And I think at least half a day or a day a week, I would focus on ludodidactiek, as we pronounce it in Dutch. We haven't found a proper English translation yet. So since we are primarily focused on activities within the Netherlands, we stay for the Dutch terminology for now. But we are planning to make probably a translation of the book we wrote about it. And then we have to deal with an English version of the term.
But that keeps it very unique as well. So maybe just leaving it that way makes it difficult for somebody else to just come and copy it. It's a very unique thing that you have.
Yeah, that was a deliberate choice actually, because at the time when we decided on this name, it would have been really easy to go with gamification, as this was a term that was already floating around a lot. And after very careful deliberation, we decided not to go with that term. And the reason primarily was that I'd come across many examples that were both good and excellent and very bad under the same flag. And I felt at the time that I thought it was risky to blindly follow that wide category of solutions that range so widely beyond the good, bad, and the ugly. So that was mainly the reason to say, okay, if we come up with our own definition and our own terminology, then at least we are to blame for anything that goes with it, whether it's good or bad. But we don't have to continuously try and find our place in that realm.
Yeah. In Spanish, there's something similar, a similar discussion that went around. It was not of somebody in specific, but there's a whole group of people that they're in Spanish, that the literal translation would be something like gamificación. But some people started saying, well, maybe in Spanish there's even a better word, which is ludificación. So it's probably a bit more related to what you guys have as well.
Yeah, I assume so. And on the other hand, I find it sometimes tiring to end up in all kinds of academic debates on the terminology and the definitions. And to what counts for me is that we try to improve education, and that
and to do it right. That's
and to do it right, and and to help teachers out to find their way into that space. And for whatever we call it, we should do it right.
Exactly. Willem, question: is there any place where we can find more information about this that you're talking about, ludodidactiek? I think that sounds a little bit better.
Yeah.
In English especially, because we probably have some people that speak Dutch in the audience, but not everybody for sure.
No, as I said, that is one of the weaknesses at the moment, is that we've focused so much on the Dutch context and the Dutch market, since that was our initial pool and our initial focus. So I'm afraid at the moment we are poorly documented in the English language.
That's okay. That's a good thing that you're here, so that you can also spread your word through another of your many channels. Because I've seen you have many talks. You're going to be in Gamification Europe in Amsterdam very soon as well. So that will be many other routes that will be coming in for you to spread that message of ludodidactiek, for sure.
Yeah.
But Willem, the next question that I want to make you is a question we like to make to every one of our guests, because in the audience you'll find people who have maybe been doing this for years, some people who are testing out the water, some people who are standing on the fences and taking a look at what this looks like. And I want to make sure, especially that they know that not everything is perfect and some things don't go right the first time, but there's many things to learn, even when you see all these amazing experts like yourself doing incredible work. You started somewhere as well. So this question is about a story of what you would like to call maybe your favorite fail or failure, first attempt in learning, as we like to coin it as well. And probably that's something that sets you up for future success, for a lot of learning. So do you have such a story, Willem?
An epic fail.
Exactly.
I must say there's so many failures. It's hard to pick an epic one, because I this sounds crazy, but I don't think I ever had an epic fail, in the sense that nothing worked for what I intended to achieve. But there are very wide ranges of success rates in the attempts that we've done. And so I might have attempts where 30% went right and 70% went wrong, or I got 70% right and 30% wrong.
So let's go for one of those.
Yeah, I think making mistakes is really important to to learn and get your act together and learn the ropes of such a new field. But I must say that I can give you a recent example. We have developed let's say, a model or methodology that deals with innovation projects in general. And I know from a lot of existing models that are derived from project methodologies like Prince2, a very well-known project methodology. But in many of those, the end user is often involved at a late stage in the projects. And they accommodate for a lot of the failures in those kind of projects as well. So from a design institute perspective, we always put the user first. So we developed this model, which is, let's say, a sort of extension on the design thinking model that's well known from Stanford and often spread around the notion of design thinking. When we created the model, I thought it would be nice if innovation officers in many organizations could play a game to come to grasp with our model. So I set out to create a card game to make that happen. And while I was making that, a voice in my head reminded me that I was enforcing a certain morale on the players, because I have so many lessons learned from innovation projects that I wanted to communicate the bad and wrong to the people that were playing the game. But they were playing, in a way, my game. So when we did a field test with a lot of innovation officers, they had excellent conversations around the play table. And this was my main aim. They were really right. They had a good conversation. But in the end, they had some critique, some serious critique, that they felt like they were playing a game where the outcome was steering them into a certain direction, a certain outcome. So that there was a sort of underlying rules of good and bad being embedded in the game, which they were spot on. It was a serious mistake to try it. And I had a voice in my head telling me, and I did it anyway, and then got some real good feedback that I was doing the wrong thing. So what I did in the end was to get all the game mechanics out of it and turn it into a tool, so a neutral tool. And I've used it a couple of times ever since, and it works like a charm. So the main mistake was trying to make it into a game where that was not appropriate, or I could not conceive it in a proper way.
Wow, so that's an interesting story. Is there anything that you would say now looking back, just as you said that maybe turning it into a game was not the appropriate thing, but is there anything that turning back and saying, well, had I considered these one or two things or whatever you didn't consider at the point, now looking back, that you would tell your younger self and say, well, take this into consideration and your project will be a lot more successful?
Oh, yeah. And the stupid thing is I was telling it myself. I just wasn't listening. Yeah, that was really, really stupid. I felt such an ass afterwards. But I would say that to me, and I use it a lot in my presentation nowadays as well, is I think the work of Daisy and Ryan and Daniel Pink on self-determination theory is really valuable in avoiding these kind of mistakes. And I've come up with a little triangle from their work, and the triangle model shows 3 words. And it says autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And so they use it in the context of intrinsic motivation for professionals. And I use it for a similar perspective, but then for players. So I argue that any player in any game should feel or experience these 3 notions. So they should be able to experience a clear sense of autonomy, a clear sense of mastery, and a clear sense of purpose. So the game should have a good purpose, and a player should feel enough autonomy to make their own decisions and follow their own strategies. And they should develop a clear sense of mastery into something that while they are playing. And I think what I did wrong was screwing up the autonomy bit. So I did not allow the players enough autonomy to make their own decisions because I had flagged these various outcomes as either good or bad.
And I think I would add there, taking a look at your story as well, that the profiles of people that you were targeting tends to be a creative bunch. And those are people who need perhaps even more autonomy than people who are perhaps not less creative in essence, but that their regular doings are not as creative. Because these people need all this liberty to be able to create, to innovate, to do new things, and perhaps considering that as an important element for your players would have helped, making this design decision that you made at that point of maybe not forcing them because that sounds too hard, but moving them through a certain trail that then they felt like kind of trapped in a way, since they are very, very creative and like to be very open about these things.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And now, and additional to that point, I think I violated their professionalism as well, because sometimes they said I've got other methodologies that also worked really well in this context and in this situation, and I couldn't argue with that. So I after this experience, I became more humble. So instead of presenting it as the model, I now present it as a model or a strategy. So I took the arrogance out of it as well, which was unintentional. But I noticed from the feedback, I thought, I created a tunnel where I should have created a field. So that was a very painful but very good learning experience.
So taking a spin on that perspective, what would you say is a story of an interesting challenge that you faced and actually solved using ludodidactiek or gamification or whatever we want to call it for today?
Mm-hmm. Well, this again, I like to take a recent example, because I think the most recent ones are where there's a culmination of so many failures and successes in the past. And over the summer period, I created a game. No, is it a game? A sort of game together with a young designer. But this was one of the most challenging things I've ever taken on. It was based on the work of a professor in the Netherlands. Her name is Christa Anbeek, and she is a theologist. And in her life, she has encountered some very serious setbacks. And this has led her to research in her own field of theology and humanism, what a person should make in their lives in suffering from these life-changing events. And she was writing a book on this, and then while writing that book, she sort of stumbled upon a methodology to guide groups of 5 to 8 people in a conversation on these life-changing events. And translated into English, she calls these contrast experiences. So she had created a sort of manual, a guideline for 8 conversations taking 2.5 hours with a group of people between 5 and 8. And each conversation had a different theme and different underlying questions that guide the people into a sort of area of wisdom. And she had worked a lot with this manual, and it worked like a charm. But it needed her as a supervisor to make sure these conversations had safety and quality. And I got into touch with her, and she approached me and said, well, could you turn this into more like a game? And my first response was no, because I had the recent experience I just mentioned on a sort of protocolized idea that did so not work with play and game. So my firm response was, no, this cannot be done because. But after, I think, a 2-hour highly inspiring conversation with her, I changed my mind. Because in that conversation, she said, could you not make it into a format where I'm not needed? So actually, she asked to be designed out of the format. And that really got me going. I thought, wow, that's a new design challenge.
And that's always interesting.
Yeah, I was so keyed up to work on this because it was on such a almost esoteric subject, requiring a lot of soft skills and for very fragile target groups. And I thought it was really important. And I'd read a bit about her work and I was really impressed with her work. So we sat down to try and create a safe conversation environment without her presence and get all the participants involved in moderation without overburdening their brains with moderation, because then they could not participate. And in the end, we came up with a clever design to do that, using a couple of cards and a bit of a manual. And now the format is done. It's going to press, and we've tested it a number of times. And it's so intriguing to see it work, because if it starts out, if I would run a camera and sort of tell you what I would see on video, you would see 5 to 8 people that prepare themselves to play a game. They read a manual, and they give each other a number of cards, and they look at them and they discuss the rules a bit, and then they start talking. And then within 15 minutes, you see a group of highly focused people listening to another person that's talking. And yeah, it works. And we didn't touch the original, let's say, protocol. We made it part of the game proceedings, but I didn't try to do anything about that bit, but to regulate the moderation, let's say, in a group of people. So it becomes a self-moderated expert group in a way.
Wow, that sounds super interesting, and I can only think of massive applications to that methodology for other things. I clearly remember a conversation I was having. I think it was Karen Sikkema, a past guest you probably know also from the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And she was talking about, there was a question about escape rooms and how to build them in higher education. And one of her ideas was to actually get the students to build it. And we were talking about the importance of the person who is facilitating the session for that. Because you say, well, you don't have weight on the design perspective, but you have weight on the facilitation end of this. So maybe it could be interesting to see how possible it is, because maybe it's not, to lead this into other fields as well. It could be a very interesting application.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly looking into this, and we made sure to get a good copyright sign on the printer's material, because I do think that we can reuse or re-engineer this in different contexts. And what was really nice, we had one playtest with young people that had a history in drug abuse, and they were clean for 2 to 3 years. And we discussed with them their contrast experiences, and I can tell you they were really severe. That was a very difficult playtest to sit in. And then I asked them in the end to compare their experiences now with, let's say, group therapy that most of them had gone through. And they all commented on the difference in having, let's say, a sort of godlike expert being present and moderating a session, compared to this variant where they were just among themselves. They didn't feel there was this omnipresence of an expert.
Yeah, and the person who also has power over you in a way, because if it's a class, you have a professor, and the professor has your grades and all. I mean, there's all of these power dynamics that even if we, as professors, try to avoid it, it's still going to be there playing its role.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's an interesting takeaway I learned from this exercise, and I'd like to share this with everybody listening. The moment you
can call them the engagers. That's our name for the audience.
Well, I would say to the engagers, what I noticed from this exercise is the moment you start, let's say, a play exercise where people commit to it voluntarily, as we know is vital to this kind of activity, and you engage them with, let's say, cards or a board and a manual, and they start reading the manual, you introduce on the table a hidden voice of authority, and the voice of authority is in the manual. You do as the manual tells you. If the manual says give everybody a green card, you just do it. And so part of getting, let's say, trying to get rid of the speaker on the table leading it, we introduced a new sort of head on the table, but it was on paper. It was the voice of the manual telling them how to get started and how to change roles and how to go through the whole exercise. And it really is a voice of authority. It's not like if you introduce a manual that the whole group says, yeah, but that's only his voice. Why would we believe him or her? And there's no questioning. There can be discussion on the rules. Well, what do they mean? Or how should we interpret this? But it's hardly ever that people start sort of discussing whether what's in there is a valid proposition to start a game.
There's a beautiful thing happening there as well, which is that the rules are not judging you. The rules are not a human being thinking about what you look like or whatever, and our own minds are not evaluating whether this person is evaluating me or not. And all this dynamic that goes on in people's minds, it's not there. The rules are just there, and they're written, and that's it.
Yeah, they're sort of neutral force, yeah. It's a sort of, it comes out of the blue and you just follow it and see what happens. And I think that was to me, that was a very powerful moment that I thought, geez, you could do so much just by the embedded voice of authority that's in instructions. Or so even if you write a role card for somebody, say, now you're a merchant and you're in 16th century and you've got this amount of money and now you can do this. It is a voice of authority, but it's just written down, and somehow it doesn't give the same conflict of power that you have with teenagers and a teacher, or with a trainer and professionals, or as you say, all these power dynamics is so concurrent if humans do that to each other.
Indeed. And moving on to the next subject, Willem, we would like to know if you have any sort of process that you follow or any procedure or similar when you are creating a game, gamification, especially in the learning atmosphere, in the classroom, in training, in the university. If you have a process, what does that process look like in a brief sense?
Well, for this particular process, we created a tool, and it's called the Playful Design Canvas. And to me, it contains all the regular elements that I use or go through in steps to come up with a design. And one of the first things, it depends a bit on whether I do it myself or when I do it with teachers or with teachers. Because if I do it with new teachers that are not familiar with it, you get into a sort of teaching role, or so there's a learning curve in it. If I do it myself, I can take shortcuts and crisscross through the methodology to get my acts together. But one of the first things I do is I call this déjà vu, which is a pun on, let's say, the classical notion of déjà vu that most people have experienced in their lives. But déjà vu means that I try to picture the desired situation I want to achieve through my design. And I do this visually. I try to create a visual movie in my head of the pupils doing what I want them to do in terms of behaviors, learning behaviors. And at the same time, I make a list or make notes of things I do not want to see them do. So if I have groups of 5, I do not want one of them to feel left out or not vital to the proceedings or bored or waiting. And so I make these 2 lists or 2 images of things I want to see and things I do not want to occur. And they are part of my to-do list when I start designing. And then when I have sort of got a sort of initial sense of that, I go back to the learning goals and I try to find a context in which those learning goals could be transformed into, let's say, attractive play aims. Because often the learning goals are the problem because they are boring or they lack purpose for a 14-year-old. So I have to translate that into a different purpose that they might really like or that they might want to achieve. And then you start entering a sort of spin in your head where you say, what perspective would do this? What role would do this? And then what would be their aim? And if that is their aim, how would they achieve that? And how would they win? And what is their responsibility? If they don't do it, what goes wrong? All those kinds of considerations. And yeah, by that time, I think you start to think about verbs and actions. And I think that's basically where a design begins to take shape.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for that. I know you'll probably say it's only in Dutch, but is there any place where we can see this playful design canvas?
No, but if people contact me, I can send it to them because I've got an English version for that with a bit of subtitle. So
beautiful.
That would be just a matter of people contacting me through the internet, through LinkedIn, and say, could you send me a copy of that? And I'll make sure to get a copy.
Thank you. That's very, very graceful of you. Engagers, quick break from this interview. If you love what gamification can achieve, then you will love going to a gamification conference. And this year, we got a 10% discount for the Engagers to assist to Gamification Europe 2018 in Amsterdam. All you have to do is get your tickets for the conference at professorgame.com/gamification Europe. That's our affiliate link. It was an incredible experience in 2017, full of chances to learn and interact with the top experts. If you think you want to make it, get your tickets sooner rather than later. Their prices are only going up and tickets might run out. So click pause and go to professorgame.com/gamification Europe to get your tickets discounted today and also support Professor Game. So now we're going to move into this sort of second part of the interview. But before getting started with these questions, I wanted to get a quick glance of what your talk in Gamification Europe will look like. Why would people be going to Gamification Europe and listening to you? I know it's only one track, so all of us will be in the same room listening to you for sure. But if you were to convince somebody through your talk to come to Gamification Europe, what would be the things that you would highlight? What will we learn after being next to you in this topic?
Well, what I will try to do is to make a point how I think that gamification should and will be deeply rooted in the core expertise of game design, and that you need to have a sort of solid understanding of all the aspects of game design as a discipline to really do it right. And I hope I'm not offending anyone, but I see some examples under the, let's say, under the flag of gamification where there's a notion of if you take some elements from that field and in the short version it is let's grab some points, let's grab some badges, let's grab some leaderboards and put those on a context that's not that attractive and it will amend it. I'm quite seriously concerned that that will not work in the long run for a variety of reasons. So I will make some arguments why I think that's not the best approach to use the power of this new paradigm and this new medium. Another thing is that I'm struggling with technology in this field, which is for me a sad thing to say because I love technology in all shapes and forms. But I've noticed, especially in my work in the Netherlands, that introducing technology to the solutions we are looking for, especially in education, is pushing teachers away from you. And especially if you want them to be able to create solutions themselves. There are a few teachers that have the time and the expertise and the effort to learn a programming language, do a bit of visuals, learn some tools, but most are far too burdened with other obligations to make that effort. So we've gone back to pen and paper actually to make ludopedagogy effective in classrooms. And ever since we decided that, we became far more successful than trying to convince teachers that there are lovely tools out there they can use to use game design principles in their classrooms. So these are two angles I'd like to tackle in the not that long of a time we have. So yeah, I hope that would create some interesting debate at least.
Engagers, as I was hearing as well, Willem, I think his talk will be phenomenal. But those two key things, I really want to highlight them because one of them is how do we do this right? And there's many perspectives, and I think in the richness of perspectives on how to do it right, because there's many people doing it right in different ways, and that's great. That gives us many options. That gives us autonomy. That gives us the possibility of mastery. That gives us the possibility as well of bringing purpose to this because it makes it better for our educational practices. And the other thing that Willem was talking about is precisely how do we do this. Not only how do we do these things correctly, but it's very interesting that we will be able to listen to from Willem here because it's not only going to be telling us don't do points, badges, and leaderboards because I know that's something that we've heard many times. But also how that's an important point that we can bring together in gamification. So I think it's very, very important that we take into account these things, listen to Willem in his talk in Gamification Europe. And again, as you know, we will be there, and it will be also an opportunity to meet Willem in person. I will be there as well. So take the chance. I say if you have an interest in gamification, I think it's a beautiful chance to get to know other people who are experts, who are struggling like you are. Whatever situation you are, you'll find out other people to relate to the situation that you're currently at. And in that sense, Willem, I would like to know, because I'm guessing that from the things we've spoken, maybe it's something that we've already talked about, but is there anything that you would say is a best practice in gamification and in game design and all these things when you want to implement it in the classroom?
Whoa.
So, something that maybe improves a design in general.
Yeah, I have two things I'd like to share. The one thing is a best practice, and the other is a don't do it. Yeah, I can't help myself. I'd like to express this. The first thing is what we've tried for a couple of years and that works really well is something I call asymmetric design in a classroom. And I try to explain this briefly. Whenever you have a classroom situation, in the majority of cases, all the learners will do the same task at the same time, based on the same information to get the same result, right? And even if we let learners collaborate, they would collaboratively work on the same task at the same time with the same outcome so that the teacher can share the same results back. And I thought about this long, and I thought that was quite a funny way of dealing with diversity in the classroom. And it has also a lot of downsides. So, for example, if you make a group of 4 and you give them the same task as another group of 4, in that group of 4, there's probably a fast learner that is very proactive and they will take charge. And there's another one that tries to break into that. And there are 2 others that think, oh, there's some wonderful work going on. And they will sit back and enjoy the ride. And it's hard to suppress this kind of very natural human behavior. So asymmetrical design is making sure that every single learner in the classroom has a distinct responsibility and makes them unique to the design. So to illustrate this simply, let's say that you make a task, some learning task, and the outcome is ABC. And I create one group that has all the information A, and I've got one group that creates all the information B, and there's another group that has all the C information. And if you give them as a classroom the task do ABC, within minutes they will discover they have only 1/3 of what they need to accomplish the task. So they will collaborate with other teams, the B ones and the C ones, to get the full picture. So you deliberately disperse information, disperse knowledge, disperse tasks or responsibilities among the learners to make their collaboration worthwhile because they are asymmetric. They really need each other. It's not a matter of, hey, please collaborate. They cannot solve the task without the other. And this really empowers, let's say, the usual weaker learners or the less vocal learners or the less proactive learners. Whereas the strong ones, the winners, the dominant ones, are all of a sudden dependent on others, irregardless of their standing in the class. And very nearly related to this, as a let's not do that, is using the competition mechanic. So I see so many examples where teachers try some kind of gamification where they invoke competition, and they always say, my learners love it. And I tend to disagree with them. And the reason is that in our educational system, we tend to build social ladders in a classroom because we grade people. So everybody knows in the classroom who are the smarty pants and who are the weak ones, who are the quick learners and who are the slow ones, who you want in your team and who you desperately not want to collaborate with because they are stupid. And this kind of social strata can have a strong impact on learners, because if you are considered smart, you will become smarter. If you're considered less smart, you will behave less smart. And there's lots of psychology to support this. Now, in such a situation, if you then introduce gamification and through competition, you reinforce a structure that's already there. So in my designs, I always try to make the weak learners the epic winners and to make the strong learners dependent on their weaker brothers and sisters, because I want to equalize that social ladder and not reinforce a structure that's already there through the grading system.
That's very interesting. I tend to agree with what you say. I do think that there's some subtle applications to competition, especially, and I like to focus on this very much, especially when it is not related to grades. I mean, there's instances in which I've seen competition work very well, especially I teach at a business school, so students tend to be already quite a bit competitive, and and I'm quoting here, enjoy competition in general. There's instances when there's not so much at stake, or absolutely nothing at stake actually, where you can say there's a competition that can be exciting and to get them into the whole thing. There's not too many instances of that, but that's something that is possible and that I've seen happening, I have to say.
Oh no, but I fully agree. I wouldn't say that you should never do it. I would just say be careful when you do it, because exactly. It seems to be an automatic reflex for teachers. That the many I've come across that we train from let's say 0 to ludopedagogy, that the first thing they try and explore is to use competition. And why
gamification is competition, and it's certainly not.
Exactly, it's certainly not, and it should be handled with care. And if you let teams compete with each other, it's less vulnerable for the effects I just mentioned than take individuals against each other. The quizzes and that's where things like leaderboards can work for you, but they also can work against you. And we should handle them with care.
Indeed. And in that sense, taking a spin on this topic, what would you say is your favorite game?
Whoa. I think I have a very strong sweet spot for Minecraft. for a variety of reasons. But I hold that one as a very unique piece of work. And then closely second might be Zelda on the Switch, which is an astounding piece of design. So these are two clear favorites. But whatever game I'm currently playing is always, for some time being, my utmost favorite. So
and they don't seem to have leaderboards, as far as I can remember.
no, but that also has to do with my personal style of play. I mean, I have got some friends that are frantic about leaderboards and winning, but I'm more kind of an explorer, simulator kind of guy. So there's so many players, so many styles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Willem, is there anybody that you would like to listen to in an interview like this one, in this podcast, in Professor Game?
Ooh, that is a good question. Oh, there's so many. It depends whether they're willing to come to your podcast.
I mean, somebody once mentioned Miyamoto of Nintendo, so feel free to say whatever you feel is right. But of course, if it's somebody down to earth that will probably be in the podcast, that's amazing as well.
Well, I must say that I would like to hear Jane McGonigal. I know her work from the early days of the Game Developers Conference, and she was into alternate reality games, and she's done some really interesting stuff in the past. And I lost track of her current progression, and I'm very curious what she would be working on now. And I'd like to hear Miguel Sicard, who did some really nice work on play and also a bit more reflective on play and play design. So yeah, there's so many. Miyamoto would be excellent, of course.
It would be definitely phenomenal. But
yeah.
is there you mentioned Jane, and she has a couple of books. I don't know if Michael has also books, but is there any book, if you had to say one book that you would recommend, which book would it be, and maybe a quick why?
I don't know. These are harsh questions. There's always I find
these are this is the hard side of the questions, right?
I know, because there's always the weak answer. Oh, there's so many, but I have difficulty deciding to see why I would recommend a particular book. I know that there's one book that has done a lot in shaping my ideas on, let's say, game and play design, and it is a book by an American professor, and also he was one of the early thinkers I came across when I was setting out my ludopedagogy approach, and his name is David Sheffer, and he wrote a book, and I keep forgetting the exact title because it's quite long, and it is something like How Computer Games Can Teach Our Children to Learn, and then some mix of these words. So
we'll put it in the show notes, so worry not, Willem.
I have to look it up. But in that book, he did some astounding stuff that really stuck with my brain in to think about education. One of the things in that book is he made a distinction between little games and big games. So he said, if you design something playful, you not only design the product itself, the game itself, but design the context in which it has to be successful. There are two layers of design. And I still think that is a brilliant thought. Because so many times I've seen a game fail in classrooms or fail in hospitals or fail in other contexts because all the focus was on the game itself and not the context in which it had to perform. So that was a really important lesson I took from that book. And he did some other work. He introduced me to a terminology called epistemic framing, which I thought was highly scientific in its terminology. But he used that term to describe the professional frames that somebody has in any profession, the knowledge, the skill, the attitudes, but also the values, the pride, the real feelings of joy accompanying a certain role, a certain profession. He did a lot of work on engineering games for children to get them into engineering. And this whole notion of these epistemic frames seriously got to me. And we still use it with our students and our teachers that we train today to shape their ideas when they make role-playing games or games that relate to certain professionals or professional roles in reality.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much for that recommendation. Again, we'll have the specific link in the show notes, so you can go to professorgame.com. and type in Willem, that's Willem, and you will be able to find this episode and take a look at the show notes as well. However, Willem, we seem to have run out of time. I could spend all day, and in this case all night, talking about gamification, but we have to have a limit time for the total of this podcast, and we're very near to it. So I would like to know, besides all that, all the advice that you have already given about thinking of not only digital and technological games, but physical games as well, and other types of things that do not involve technology, to be able to bring together other teachers, the do's, the don'ts, everything that you've been talking about this podcast. Is there any final small piece of advice that you would like to leave us with, so that then we can say goodbye?
Yeah, what I would say in any design, and I tell it to my students and I tell it to the teachers we work with, is try to get your first prototype to your players as fast and as simple as possible. I see lots of people try to work too long on their initial idea and to start polishing it and make it more beautiful before they do their first test. And there's so much you have to throw away after your first test, because humans are insane animals and they never behave the way you expect them to. So yeah, the faster you get your rough stuff on the table and let them play and tear it apart and build it again, the better. And then do 4 or 5 iterations and then start polishing and beautifying it, and you'll be home and dry. And still I have to secure myself. I don't polish it too much before I bring it to a table, because you have to throw things away, and you know it. And it's such a waste of resources if you spend too much time on your first round. And that will be my most important lesson to anybody.
Definitely, and that's a fantastic lesson to be with. So finally, Willem, you mentioned that we could contact you some way to ask you for the dashboard, not the playful design canvas. So yeah. Where can we find you? Can we find you on Twitter, on LinkedIn? Where can we find you? Can you give us some final links, and then we'll say goodbye?
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Twitter, and unfortunately I took a very silly Twitter handle because it's my first name, but that's spelled the other way around. So it's NAG_MELLIW, Naimelil. It's my first name, but then written the other way around. You can find me under my name, Jan-Renger, at LinkedIn, or you can go to the hku.nl website, and you should find a section called ludodidactiek, where you can find more pointers, also to the book if you can read Dutch. And if people would like it in English and they give a shout out, if we get enough response, we might soon make an English copy of it.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for that. Again, engagers, you will be able to find all this in the show notes. So you can spell his name Willem. If you put that in the search bar, you'll find it. And there you will be able to get all the links to be able to contact Willem as fast as you can. So thank you very much for your time, Willem. It's been a pleasure to have you here. Again, we are going to spend a lot of time in Gamification Europe talking about these things and getting excited about all of these things. But for today and for this podcast, it's time now to say it's game over.
Okay, fair enough. I hope I got a high score, because I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Top ranking as usual.
Thanks a lot.
Hey Engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Willem Jan. Do you have questions that you would like to ask our guests? Then go to professorgame.com/question and ask your question. If it's selected, it will come up in a future episode and you will get your answer. And before you go on to your next mission, would you like to know a senior editor of the magazine Inside Higher Ed who also wrote a book about how the game believes in you? Then you have to listen to Greg Topo next week. So if you want to listen to him, subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.